Hey, it's Amy, it's Virgo. I'm here with a new topic. Today we are talking about daytime charts, nighttime charts, or as they're technically called in technical language, diurnal charts and nocturnal charts. You can guess which one is the nighttime, right? So many times people will say, the reason why I really want to do this video, so many times people will say, why do people believe in astrology? It's not real. Everybody with the same birth sign can't be the same. And it's like people who are astrologers or who study astrology know there's house placements, there's aspects, there are degrees, there are all these other components, there are, all these other components to astrology that help us. There's decans, right? There's so many ways we can break down your sun sign in ways to differentiate you from someone else, okay? And so this is another technique. So if you sometimes feel like you might say I'm a Libra, but I'm a different type of Libra, or I'm a Leo, but I'm a different type of Libra, or I'm right, whatever it is you are, this could be another thing to add to your astrological knowledge in terms of this theory and this idea of what type of chart you have in terms of when you were born. So what is the whole concept around this? Just to keep it simple, if you have a daytime chart, there are certain planets that are going to be seen as benefics. These are planets that are going to be considered favorable for you. These might even be planets you identify more with. So if you have a daytime chart, you might identify more with your sun sign. So for instance, if you have a daytime chart, the planets that are considered to be your planets, these are your benefic planets, Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, okay? These are planets that you may identify more with, or that you fully understand. For example, I have a daytime chart. For so long, I was, again, I'm a Virgo rising, Virgo sun, and I really understood that part of myself, right? I understood the Virgo part of me. My moon took more for me to discover and fully understand. I love having a Sagittarius moon, but it wasn't something I easily identified with until I did more work on myself and more diving and more deeply, and not just moon and Sag, but identifying with my moon in the fourth house and understanding what that meant for me. Okay, so that's an example of like the sun. If you have a daytime chart, remember, think about sunlight, right? This is it's shining here, okay? Now, if you have a nighttime chart or a nocturnal chart, the planets that are going to be considered to be more favorable for you, or the planets that you may resonate more with, are the moon, Venus, and Mars, okay? And so there, you're going to, some people with nighttime charts may have more of a connection to their moon sign. So this is one of the reasons that I really do like diving into deeper techniques with astrology. So one thing I do want to share is the easy way to look at this could be if your sun is above. So remember when you take the chart and you split it in half, okay? And you have the top chart, 7 through 12, which is actually the south, because it's the later houses, 7 through 12. If your sun is above that line, you're considered to have a daytime chart. Those houses are going to be, you're going to have more, you might identify more with the world outside of yourself. If the sun degree is above or higher than the ascendant, then it's a daytime chart, okay? That's one way to look at that. So if your sun is at first degree of Leo and your ascendant is at the 22nd degree of Leo, then this would be a day chart. Now again, some people don't have that ambiguity because it's really clear, but I'm just giving an example. You use the descendant sign. Is it in my 6th house or my 7th house? Because we're going to look at that axis of the ascendant descendant to make that decision, because the only people that are going to have that issue are the people who are born in that early morning / coming out of night time, and the people where it's coming out of late afternoon and moving into night. You have the degrees of the ascendant and where the sun is, okay? Because you're the ones that are going to have the issue. A person who has their sun in the 3rd house, they're not going to have that issue. A person who has their sun in the 9th house, you're not going to have that issue. You already know if it's a night or daytime chart. What you're going to do, so if you are a person that was like, wait, was I born late afternoon or night? Like, it's weird, shifting. It's the sunset at 6:03, and what is going on? So with you would do the same thing. Look at your descendant sign, okay? If your sun is above the descendant sign, if it's the degrees are higher, then you're going to say, okay, this is a daytime chart. If it's below, you're going to say it's a nighttime chart. So for example, your descendant is the 22nd degree of Capricorn and your sun is at the 7th degree of Capricorn, that is a nighttime chart. That sun is likely in that 7th house, 6th to 7th house. Okay. So if you have weird energy where you're like, hey, I don't know what's going on here. If I use Placidus, it says this. If I use whole signs, it uses. Just look at the degrees. Don't worry about whole signs. Don't worry about, Placidus right now. Look at the degrees and look at the sun as it pertains to, is it higher than your ascendant or descendant, or is it lower than your ascendant or descendant? Okay. And if it's still kind of weird to you, you kind of have to just do a gut check. If you're like, wait, I've done all these techniques. I tried the ascendant thing. The ascendant's at the same degree. That could be tricky. Or you'll say, I looked at the website, it tells me this, but I don't feel that's right. It's not my experience. Then you will just have to use your personal experience to say, I think that I actually have a daytime chart, diurnal chart, or a nocturnal chart, nighttime chart. Okay. Now, again, this is only for the people who have that gray area. If you were born at 10 a.m., it is what it is. You were born at 11 p.m., 11:30 p.m., it is what it is, because those are very clear distinctions between what's day and what's morning, okay? It is only when we're dealing with sunset, sunrise energy, sunset, sunrise timings where it can get a little bit trickier, okay? So, Mercury is considered to be neutral, okay? So in this, nocturnal, diurnal framework, it's neutral. Now, what I tend to do, and I'm not sure if other people do this, is, to me, I don't use Mercury as neutral in someone's chart if it is the ruler of their chart, or if it is, if it's somehow, if Mercury is exalted, if Mercury is conjunct a certain planet, if a person has Mercury conjunct the sun, Mercury conjunct Jupiter, whatever, I might not consider it neutral. So if Mercury has a positive effect on someone's chart, I typically will tell them, like, this is something to keep in consideration because this planet is going to be very useful to you. But it will depend. Not all astrologers will treat it that way. Now, in general, what did I just say? I just said there's 3 planets. You're like, whoa, what about the outer planets? In this traditional method, they didn't use, and traditional astrology in general does not use the outer planets. Okay. Now, I do use the outer planets in astrology, and many modern astrologers do. And some traditional astrologers will work with it, but in different contexts and different ways. But you didn't have Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus to consider. So that is something to keep in mind when you're using this. Those planets are not there in terms of this framework. Now, you could, and I could, try to crack the code and see, like, well, what if we did use those planets in some way? Like, where would they be? But I might save that for a different type of conversation. So anyway, point being, when you are thinking of the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, of them, Jupiter is a benefic. Jupiter is considered to be a favorable planet. Many of you know that. The malefic is considered to be Saturn. And that means for you, Saturn may not be as much of a debilitating, limiting force. I have Saturn, I was born on a Saturday as well, so that's the thing. So I've always had a pretty good relationship with Saturn, knowing how to be mature when needing to be, learning lessons from challenging situations. My Saturn return was full of lessons, but it wasn't that bad. And I have a video about my Saturn return, and just it in general, right? So when you think of that, it's like my relationship with the planet that's supposed to be malefic has not been that bad, okay? And of course, there's other ways to look at that. Saturn, the 3rd house, yes, that deals with growing up faster, maturing faster, having to deal with harsh topics. Growing up, I did have family members pass away, especially my father. So, and Saturn's in Scorpio. So there's a whole thing to that. But in general, Saturn is not a planet that is really difficult for me. Now, if you have a nighttime chart where you're dealing with the moon, Venus, and Mars, the benefic planet is Venus, right? So Venus and Jupiter are both these planets that can bring a lot, right? Jupiter, we know, can bring riches. Venus can bring money. Jupiter is expansion. Venus can represent, harmony and relationship, and Venus can represent value, and Jupiter can represent chance, right? So those are positives. Mars is the malefic in the nocturnal chart. But if you have a nocturnal chart, Mars is not going to be as much of an issue as it is for maybe someone with a daytime chart. Okay, so when we look at Saturn and Mars, just talk about how Saturn can be, limiting, and it could represent delays, and it could represent harsh lessons. Mars can represent challenges, conflict, brutality sometimes, right? To some degree, even violence in some way. Mars, right, for a nocturnal chart might be more of a positive for you. I have a daytime chart, but the thing is, Mars in the 12th house anyway, which I have a video about that, I think. I know I do have a Mars video. I have a Mars video and I think I have a Mercury video. But anyway, I've talked about Mars in the 12th house somewhere. Mars can get lost in that 12th house. And so though I like my Mars in Leo placement, sometimes it is in the 12th house. Remember, the things that I really wish and want to do are harder to do than the things I have to do, because Jupiter's in my 6th house, and Jupiter's already one of my benefic planets. So Jupiter, right, is really, it works well in that 6th house. It knows what to do. It knows how to make those responsibilities and those things I have to do work. Whereas the Mars, when we think of the 12th house, is dealing a lot with our imagination and dealing a lot with, of course, spirituality, but also, when you have not defined your 12th house, you can struggle a lot with feeling lost, with needing to find purpose, sometimes even feeling disconnected, isolated, right? With Mars being there, I have to remind myself of the importance of doing the actions that I really want to do, right? There's tons of things I want to do, but sometimes they don't always get done. So that's been my relationship with Mars. And just always also understanding the things that upset me in ways that are concrete, because we know Mars in the 12th house can deal with hidden anger, right? So it's important to know yourself. So that's how I've experienced Mars, okay? Now, again, it doesn't mean these planets, and this is why I think for so long I was somewhat hesitant to talk about this, because I do not subscribe to bad chart, good chart, bad house, good house. Yes, there are theories on which houses are more fortunate. Some houses, in my opinion, are just going to be more challenging, but it doesn't mean they're bad, because you can have a house that has planets in it that work really well together, that are aspecting other planets in positive ways. So that's why interpreting charts is important. It's not just about throwing out a bunch of placements and saying, is my chart horrible? It's about understanding, interpreting your own chart, or having it done. Okay. Now, why does this matter? Does this matter to you? Do you have to use it? You don't have to use it. I've done plenty of really good readings and not talked about daytime and nighttime chart. But you can use this, you can first start off by looking at where those planets are. So for instance, for me, the 12th house traditionally was considered to be an unfortunate house. It was unfavorable, but the sun is supposed to be, I'm supposed to have this sun, Saturn, and Jupiter be positives in my chart. So the sun being in the 12th house hasn't really hindered me. Yes, I had to learn my power from that house and to really start to shine in certain topics associated with the 12th house. But I never doubted myself, right? I never felt lost. I never felt something was wrong with me because of the 12th house themes. I always felt like, is there something wrong with the world? Or, why am I not attaching to certain theories and themes? Like, where do I need to really place myself to feel like I belong? But my sun energy, though Virgo, we have our issues. We can have our issues. We can have our areas where we're not always secure because we're worried about perfection, which doesn't exist. But for the most part, the sun in my 12th house has not hindered me, right? And I know that it has in some ways, but I'm aware of it. So the point is, you want to look at where these planets are on your chart and start to make some plans. What is this going to mean for me, right? If I have, yes, maybe you might have a moon chart, a nocturnal chart, and you're saying, yeah, I resonate more with my moon sign, but I want to focus more on my sun sign, because I see all these articles and all these books about, my sun sign is supposed to be this, but I don't feel that way at all. And that doesn't mean you have to change who you are necessarily, unless it's bad, but it means that you haven't identified your confidence. You don't feel confident in who you are and what you project. And so you might need to work more on your outer expression, because you already know internally how you feel, right? So you could use it in that way. If you don't strictly subscribe to this idea of sect, that's okay. You don't have to use it. You can say, oh, cool video, and move on. And so again, there's so many different ways in which you can identify with your chart. This just adds another layer to it. You could also ask yourself, what is my relationship between these planets and my dominant signs? right? What are these planets that are supposed to be positive for me representing? Which planet can be a challenge for me? Because you might be a person that's like, you don't need to work on your Mars, you need to work on what's going on in your Saturn placement, right? Because what will happen in astrology is we'll read a description and say, oh, wow, doom and gloom, oh no. And really it's like, wait, based on my chart, this planet might actually be a positive for me. This planet I need to work on a little bit more. Let me go to my chart and look at the aspects between Saturn and other planets. Or you might have a day chart and say, you know what? Have I been ignoring my moon sign? Do I not feel a connection to my moon sign? And a lot of times people don't feel a connection to something and they write it off. Okay, I don't feel a connection. This isn't real. But it's like, have you done the investigation? Have you done the internal work as well? Now, if you have any abnormal situations going on or special circumstances, then it requires interpretation. It requires, typically you need to study that energy in your chart, or you need to get a reading from somebody. Because let's say you're like, well, I have a daytime chart and I have the sun is conjunct the moon. So is the moon supposed to be an issue, right? But it could be, right? So you could have a person it's really easy to showcase, right? Maybe for some people being a sun in Leo. It's really easy to showcase that. But it's not, right? In terms of your moon. Maybe your moon, you need more. And when it comes to your emotional needs, it's harder to fully express what you need. You assume people are going to know what you need. And that's where you get that type of person where it's like, you like certain things about them, but then the way they handle others or their lives is not really conducive for productive results, right? So you could have situations like that where you're like, wait a minute, my Mars and my Saturn are trining, but it says that Saturn is supposed to be a difficult planet for me. Like, what do I do with that? That's where interpretation comes into play. Okay, this is more thematic. Take a step back, look at it more thematically. You don't have to look at this too intensely. But another way this helps is that for people who are trying to figure out even like their chart, if there's any weirdness with your birth time and you're trying to figure it out, you can sometimes use this technique to kind of see, well, which planets are really positive, really which planets are working for me, which planets are not working for me.